The House comes to the debate on the Budget Policy Statement 2025 and Half-Year Economic and Fiscal Update 2024.
Honourable Dr. Deborah Russell.
Mr Speaker, I want to remind this House about what New Zealanders really care about.
That's right.
They care about jobs.
That's right.
They care about health. They care about homes. Now, there's a lot of fancy words and economic concepts in this debate. A lot of talking about fiscal ceilings and growth and measures of how we measure the economy. But at the end of the day, what New Zealanders want to really know is how what the government is doing matters for their jobs. How it matters as to whether or not they can get health care. How it matters as to whether or not they have a warm, dry home to live in. You see, the budget policy statement is full of lots of numbers, full of economic concepts, but the budget is not just about numbers and economic concepts. It is the government's plan for New Zealand, the plan for the coming year. And it is a plan from that government which is severely lacking. Let me take you through how it just misses out. So the government has said that it has 4 policy areas that it's going to focus on in Budget 2025. And the first of those, it says it's going to lift economic growth through measures to address New Zealand's long-term productivity challenges. Well, they seem to think they can do it just by saying the words growth, 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 growth. But let me unpack what needs to be done in order to get growth up. It means we need ordinary people with well-paid jobs. It means we need scientists creating the innovative research that takes New Zealand forward. It means we need people getting good quality education. So that growth, 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 growth and productivity, for ordinary New Zealanders, it means, do they have a well-paid job where they can use machinery and equipment that lifts their productivity? Do we have scientists doing the work out in the fields with the farmers to help lift the productivity there? In the labs, creating innovative research? That government has fired 500 or so scientists so far. It's gotten rid of them, getting rid of some of our best and brightest. That's their commitment to growth. That government has not put aside any extra money for education so far. It has a really limited amount of money it can spend this budget because of the constraints it's put on itself. And so far, most of that has been allocated to health. There is no room for even inflation adjustments in education. That government is not committed, much as it might say it is not committed to ensuring that every New Zealander gets a decent education. How then are they going to lift growth? The next thing they said they were going to concentrate on was what they call social investment. And they said what that means is trying to get better results from the government's investment in social services. But what have they done there? They have undermined the health system. There is less money per person in health. So much for an investment in social services. And in fact, there's some really nasty overtones have come through from the government. We've seen it in the policies mentioned by some of the parties in this House, that when it comes to medicines, this was in political party policy agendas, perhaps medicines will only be available for people who are productive. I think straightforwardly, decent health care ought to be available for all New Zealanders. And we know at the moment that New Zealanders just can't get it. There's nothing in this document that talks about how we're going to ensure good health care for all New Zealanders. They talk about, one of the things they're going to do, one of the 4 things they're going to do is have tight control of government spending. So they're going to make sure that all government money is spent really effectively. And just today, we had the Minister of Finance coming out with some new procurement rules, how government departments would go about procuring services. And sitting in there is a line which says that they will no longer require government agencies to employ only services that pay the minimum wage for cleaners, the living wage for cleaners, say for catering, for security guards and so on. What does that mean for ordinary New Zealanders? The ordinary New Zealanders who are the cleaners, who are the security guards, who are the cooks. Well, if they are no longer paid the living wage and instead get the minimum wage instead, that is a drop in their wages of $186 a week or $9,672 a year. That is that government's commitment to ordinary New Zealanders, taking nearly $10,000 a year off the people who work hard as security guards, the people who work hard as cooks, the people who work hard as cleaners. That is that government's commitment to decent, well-paying jobs. It is taking money off the hardest workers who are paid some of the lowest wages in our country, and they are making it even worse. That is absolutely shameful. And in terms of those procurement rules that they've come up with today, the other thing they've said is that they are no longer going to require government services to have buildings built to a 5-star rating standard. They should no longer be required to have battery electric or hybrid electric vehicles. They should no longer have to use low waste or recyclable products.
Back to the 90s.
There is no commitment to working on building a sustainable economy from that government. Not sustainable in terms of money, but sustainable in terms of the environment we live in. You know, this budget policy statement is remarkably silent about the hugest issue we have facing us, and that is the issue of climate change. But it's lurking in there in these cuts to government services, where they are going to cut any commitment to working on climate change. That is shameful too. And then their fourth strategy, they've said they're going to develop a sustainable pipeline of long-term infrastructure investments. Well, the ferries? What happened there? A massive piece of infrastructure this country needs, and they cut it. Dunedin Hospital? A massive piece of infrastructure that this country needs and is particularly needed in the South Island. And what do? They put it on hold and incurred more costs. We know that there's about $800 million has gone down the tubes because of the very short-sighted decision that government made on the ferries. We know that they incurred more costs because they simply sat on Dunedin Hospital for a while, and now they talk about making good long-term infrastructure decisions. They've got a very poor record in that regard. So in terms of those strategies that the government has, for ordinary people in New Zealand, it has meant cuts, it has meant insecure services, it has meant that the sorts of jobs that we want are not being funded. So if we talk about the sorts of things that we care about, that jobs, that health, that homes, that government is not interested in them. And then they did a nasty, fudgy little cover-up job in the budget policy statement. You know, in the budget fiscal strategy report for budget 2024, the government then made a commitment. It said it would return Obergall, it's a measure, operating balance before gains and losses, to being positive by 2027-28. But by the time they came around to doing the numbers this year, they realised they simply couldn't do it. So they came up with a new measure, Obergall X. They couldn't get the books to say what they wanted, so they fudged them instead. And we had a long discussion in Select Committee about this as to whether it was appropriate to create this new measure. Treasury said no, the experts we consulted, we said no. Everyone said it was just smoke and mirrors. Smoke and mirrors designed to cover up the failings of that government. Failing in the jobs front, failing with respect to health, failing with respect to homes, and trying to cover up that failure by introducing a dodgy accounting measure. The only person who wanted it was the Minister of Finance. Every single other person advised against it. That is an absolute train wreck of a government. They should admit it, and should admit it right now. They should change their leader who's leading them astray, and they need to do better by ordinary New Zealanders.
This time has expired. The Honourable Willie Jackson.
Another terrible speech, Mr. Speaker, from this government, who is so fixed on growth. And Mr. Speaker, as you've heard from this side, jobs, health, and homes have to be the priority for this government, but they aren't the priority for this government. They're certainly the priority for the Labour Party and for the opposition. I'm proud that we have made that very clear in the last week. Our leader made that clear at his recent speech and recent reshuffle. We've heard from a government that knows the price of everything, Mr. Speaker, and the value of nothing. Their budget policy statement is a vacant list of promises that won't be met because ultimately what we see from this government is an economic policy, Mr. Speaker, that betrays the people for the donors' interests, Mr. Speaker, and I think that's what our communities are saying, and you'd have to agree with that. To claim as they have to have tamed inflation with their austerity budget is a nonsense and a falsehood. As we all know, inflation skyrocketed because COVID shut down global supply chains, Mr. Speaker. For National to take credit for inflation falling because those global supply chains reopened, it's just such a load of nonsense, it's not funny. The severe cutbacks this government have embarked upon to pay for tax cuts we couldn't afford. It's not good economic management at all, Mr. Speaker, because if it was good economic management, you would be looking at a 5.1% unemployment rate, and we know that 9.7% of that is Maori and 10.7% of that is Pacifica, Mr. Speaker. 31% of Kiwis are struggling to pay their power bill, 24% are struggling to buy food, 26% are struggling to pay rent, Mr. Speaker. 29% are struggling with transport costs. 1 in 4 kids are going hungry. This is where the growth strategy has taken us. It's just shocking at the moment. Violence against kids, against children is rising. Homelessness is rising, Mr. Speaker. Inequality is rising. Mortgage missed payments and unpaid bills are at their highest level in a decade. This is where the great management has got us right now. This government's economic focus is cutting more public spending and hoping that no one notices. They can't manage to get basic edible food, Mr. Speaker, to our kids at school. It's a total disgrace and embarrassment at the moment, and we're seeing that every day in question time, Mr. Speaker, the embarrassment that we're seeing on the faces of Minister Stanford as she has to put up with Minister Seymour's nonsense. And as we all know, he never ever wanted to feed the kids, Mr. Speaker, which was the Act original policy. So you're dealing with a minister who never wanted to feed the kids, and you've got the shambles right now at the moment in terms of the school lunches. Mr. Speaker, I want to come to an area that not many have touched on, which is the investment in Maori, Mr. Speaker, which has gone right down. And though the government have talked about their 4 policy areas, lifting economic productivity, social investment, these are the areas that the government talks about. The investment in Maori, as we see with this budget, is minimal. So we've seen a total decrease, Mr. Speaker, in terms of Maori housing. Really sad to see that. Yes, there are pockets of investment happening, but far from enough. And so we need to see our Maori groups being invested in. In the Maori health area, there is a real minimal investment there. As we know, that in terms of the general investment in terms of health, per person, it is way below what it should be. And in terms of Māori social services, Mr. Speaker, we've had the shocking news of whānau order in the last couple of days. A lot of questions there for our communities. Hundreds of workers now being made redundant. The questions have to be asked about the process there, where we had a provider for 10 years who had it in terms of Poumatakana, in terms of our Northern Whānau Order Commissioning Agency. $155 million allocated. Now that $155 million has to go to an extra agency. Where is the investment in terms of our people at ground level? Should they be worried about this recent decision in terms of whānau order? We say yes. We say to the Minister of Māori Development to step up, and we say invest in Māori, but invest in all our people, communities and people right across the nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora.